these animals right here. I got about 10 animals that are that size, and I got about 10 animals that are that size. You can see, you know, they're about the same size. And so, the whole thing right now, I'm pretty, the thing is, I'll probably just end up grouping these animals up 10 at a time. I'll group them up 10 at a time. And so the animals in the preconditioning pen right now, they're about the same size, and I'll probably find about 6 more animals that are that size, and then I'll bring them in. But the whole thing, in terms of the bigger, broader idea, I kind of do need a bigger trailer to do this. I don't really want to be putting a bunch of small animals in with a bunch of big animals inside of a trailer. And so, but I want to group them up 10 at a time. And, I want to group them up 10 at a time. And, that'll kind of be something that I work on. Because if I sell them 10 at a time and they're about the same size, I think I'll get a little bit more at the market if I sell them 10 at a time. And the whole, the whole thing with everything going on right now, I think, there's, the thing about this whole thing is that, I don't want to put my animals out on a field with pond water when it's hot and there is no rain. All right. Something about it. I don't want to put my animals on a field with pond water. It's just fundamentally not a good idea. All right, one of the ponds is dirty, and one of the ponds, the water in the pond has completely rotted. I mean, it's effectively turned into complete just mud water. I mean, you can tell when you look at it, it looks like sewage, right? The water has completely rotted, and the animals are not just going to drink out of the clean pond; they will also drink out of that pond. And so I'm not going to be able to just tell my animals to drink out of the one clean pond. They won't do that. And so, I don't really want to put these animals out on a field that doesn't have, that only has pond water when it's blazing hot outside and there's no rain. All right, there's just something fundamentally wrong with that. I don't want to do that. And so I'm, thinking about when should I take my animals over there. But right now, all of these animals that I have here, they're effectively good to go. All right, they're effectively stable. I haven't used any debt. Right, I even shrank the size of my balance sheet, and I've just been sitting here collecting money for the last 2 months. All right, I have an astronomical amount. Just to put it all together, I would say that I end up with something around 100 to 120 cattle by March of next year. By about March of next year, I'll end up with about 120 cattle, and that will be when I use zero debt. I will not be using any debt. All right, I will not be using any loans. When I use debt, when I use loans, I will tell you that I used them, and I will tell you how much I used, and I will tell you exactly why I did what I did, okay? I will tell you when I use debt, but if I just take the money that my business makes and I put it back into my business, I would anticipate that I have about 120 animals, 100 animals by March of next year, but that would be with me using zero debt. I will probably use debt, right? I've been talking about this whole thing. What do I see going forward, and what do I see happening, right? The whole thing about it is that my big goal for next year is to run 1,000 head of cattle for the year. All right, my big goal for next year is to run 1,000 head of cattle. I run right now. I'll probably end up when I take a look at it, I'll probably end up running about 250 cattle for this year. I will probably end up running about 250 cattle for this year. I got that, you can see these two animals right here about the same size. And, the whole thing, I got that leased property squared away. I got to get a little bit more work done on that leased property, but, I've effectively gotten it squared away, and it's got two good sized ponds on it. It's just, I just don't want to put the animals out there when there's only dirty pond water. I don't want to put the animals out there. I just don't want to do that. And so, I got that lease property squared away. I'm effectively good to go. I got a lot of positive equity. I have made a drastic sum of money. I talk about this all the time. It just is what it is, because I figure it is, it's whatever, right? It's a statement of a fact. And at the end of the day, granted that you're not like mentally handicapped. And I've always said that after a certain point, there's nothing that can even be done about it. All right. I mean, I make a drastic sum of money and there's no hiding it. All right. I make a drastic sum of money. I do very well for myself. Even if I had nothing, I could redo everything in 30 seconds. It doesn't matter. All right. When it comes to farming, I legitimately make more money as a farmer than effectively anybody on the planet makes doing anything. You could be a doctor and I probably make more money than you. You could be a lawyer and I make more money than you. I don't exactly know how much money I generate. I don't. But I can tell you the things about what I see when I see money. Everything costs me nothing. That's effectively the world that I live in. Everything costs me nothing. I will probably end up more than doubling the size of my cattle herd. That won't cost me anything. I will go and buy myself a new truck. That's not going to cost me anything. I will be farming more land. It doesn't cost me anything. I effectively live in a situation where everything costs me nothing. Everything costs me nothing. The cattle don't cost me anything. The land doesn't cost me anything. The cattle feed doesn't cost me anything. My equipment doesn't cost me anything. Everything costs me nothing. Effectively nothing. It doesn't matter to me. All right, and this is also the whole thing about, money is kind of an illusion. Nothing costs me anything. When you take a look at what I'm doing, if I stopped doing this, I would hemorrhage money. I would lose hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, all right? This doesn't cost me anything. This is the whole idea of how I utilize capital, right? And anything that does cost me anything is not it's almost always such a small amount of money. I can almost guarantee it's gonna be under 100 grand. It's gonna be under 100 grand, and if it's under 100 grand, it's practically pennies. All right, it doesn't cost anything. All right, it doesn't cost anything. And so, the whole thing, and just to put, my big goal for the next year, by this year, I am on track to get everything done. I will probably end up running about 200 cattle for the year. All right, starting here very soon, I will start liquidating animals. I will take the capital that I have and I will reinvest the money back into my business, and I will grow my balance sheet. I will start re-expansion of my herd. I do have that lease property squared away. I will start re-expanding the herd. All right, I will start taking the equity, and I will start reinvesting the capital. I will start realizing gains, and I will start reinvesting the capital, and I will grow my herd. All right, I will start growing my herd again, and I would reasonably anticipate that by about March of next year, by the end of the year, I'll have ran about 250 cattle. All right, I will start re-expansion. And the whole thing about re-expanding the herd is that the herd, my growth is compounding. All right, my growth is compounding. I would reasonably, one of my big goals for next year, one of my big goals is to run 1,000 head of cattle. I really want to run 100. I really want to push myself to get to 1,000 head of cattle by next year. All right, I believe I can do it. And I got this whole deal squared away, right? I made the deal for the lease properties, and I started offering it to the landowners. And I got myself 110 acres of lease property. And I'll be doing I may not even take any more lease property. I may just start buying land. And I may just start buying land, but I'll have to see. I'm gonna get this lease property squared away, and then I may just start buying myself land. All right, because just to put things in perspective, for me to make if I was legitimately gonna push myself to make $1 million cash, if I was legitimately, I wouldn't make $1 million cash, because if I made $1 million cash, the big problem with that is that I would effectively have to pay about 40% of that in taxes. I would effectively have to pay about 50% of that in taxes. So even if I made $1 million cash, I would only have $500,000 left over, right? And the whole thing about this is, like, if I have an asset and I don't want to liquidate the asset, if I don't want the cash, but I want to keep the asset and I want to utilize the capital that is effectively the asset, I can just take a line of credit against it, right? That's the whole thing about, like if I legitimately wanted to go and buy anything, right? If I wanted to go and buy anything, I can effectively buy anything on the entire planet, short of like a super yacht. All right, I can effectively buy anything. It doesn't matter. And everything effectively costs me nothing. All right, granted that I don't go and buy like 5 Lamborghinis. If I went and bought 3 Lamborghinis, it wouldn't even matter. All right, if I bought 5, granted that I don't go and do something like that. Well, I'm not gonna say it doesn't matter. That would matter, right? Because the Lamborghinis, you would have to, they're a depreciating asset, But if I bought myself one good Lamborghini, decent Lamborghini, it wouldn't matter. All right, it wouldn't matter. What am I gonna do with the money, right? I've always said, what am I doing with the money? I am growing my business with it. All right, I'm gonna grow my business with it. I will be growing my business with it. And I will start that here very soon. All right, I got that lease property squared away. I got a deal that I offered the landowners, and I may not even take any more lease property. I may not take any more lease property. I'll have to see. I may not take anything. Well, I may not take anything under 100 acres because there's no reason for me to do so. All right, there's no reason for me to do so. If I want land, I'll just buy it. And just to put things in perspective, for me to make $1 million, legitimate, just hard money, I think it wouldn't even take me a year. It wouldn't even take me a year. If the goal was I need to make $1 million, if that was the entire goal, right? I need to make $1 million. It wouldn't even take me a year. All right, but I've always said that money is kind of this trivial thing. All right, I don't maximize my cash position. Right, the whole thing about being poor. This is a clear indicator that you're poor. If you only see cash as money, you're gonna die poor. I guarantee it. You're gonna get taxed the worst. You won't be able to hardly make anything, and then you'll die poor. So have fun with that. Cash is not the only way to make money. But if the goal on hand, and like if I was in a theoretical situation where I was going to get taxed 0% and I had an incentive to maximize my cash position, like and I could, the whole thing about maximizing a cash position is that if I made $1 million cash and then I went to the bank and I took a loan for $1 million and then I invested the loan money instead of my cash, I could hold on to the cash. All right, I could hold on to the cash, and so that would be one realistic way for me to do it. If I had $1 million cash, I would go to the bank and take a loan for another $1 million. So I would have $1 million loan, and I would have $1 million in the bank account, and then I would invest the loan. And if I invested the loan and I bought assets with it, then I could keep the $1 million that I make. If I was going to make $1 million cash, it wouldn't even take me 1 year. It wouldn't even take me a year. All right. Maybe it would take as of right now, maybe it would take me about a year. But I mean, at the end of the day, if I legitimately just liquidated all of my animals at the end of the year and just maximized my cash position, right? And you see how ridiculous that sounds. I would have to sell my land. I would have to sell my land. I would have to sell my cattle. I would have to sell my equipment. That's what it would take for me to maximize my cash position. And why would I do that? You see how ridiculous that sounds? I would rather have the equipment. I would rather have the land, and I would rather have the cattle. You see how ridiculous that sounds? Why would I do that? Right? I mean, it's borderline moronic. And this is also, guaranteed. If you are in a situation where you only see cash as money, you're poor. Guarantee it. I can almost guarantee it. Cash is not the only way to have money. All right, you don't want to be in a situation where you're poor, okay? And I've always, the whole thing about being poor is that it doesn't matter. It's not an opinion. If you're poor, you're poor. Don't lie to yourself. If you lie to yourself, you're never going to make it out. All right, and, the whole thing about something like this is that the success rate is borderline 0%. It's borderline zero. It doesn't matter. If you think that you can do it, let's see it. All right, let's see it. I would be willing to bet that you don't even get to the 10% mark. I would be willing to bet you don't even get to the 10% mark. That's, have fun. All right, a lot of this stuff, farming is one of those things that it's borderline, nobody even wants to do it. All right, at the end of the day, it just is what it is. I'm not bragging about it. I'm just telling you the truth. And when it comes to farming, I legitimately make more money than effectively anybody on the entire planet. I legitimately take a dump on people when it comes to farming. I'm not even saying this to be funny about it. I'm being serious about it. Like, when it comes to farming, if I barely try, I make 200 grand. Like, I would have to do so poorly that, I would have to sit around and collect money for 6 months out of the year and not do anything. And that would make me 200 grand. If I legitimately did not work on, pushing my business further at all, and I just sat around and collected money for 6 months out of the year, I would still make 200 grand. I am going to be pushing my business forward. Right, I came up with the whole deal for the lease properties, right? I have this whole deal for the lease properties. I will offer 10% of the net profits as a payment for the land. The equity in the animal is my money in the deal, right? I have ownership of the animals, right? The animals are my equity, and the animals are my money in the deal. And as long as I maintain a 15 to 20 ratio, as long as when I sell 15 animals I buy 20, as long as I maintain that over a long period of time, that will guarantee that my business grows by 5%. In all reality, I may even hit 7% or 10%. I'm just saying that if I sell 15 and I buy 20 and I maintain that ratio over a long period of time, that will guarantee that my business grows by a compounding 5%, and the equity of the animal is my money in the deal. That's where my money is. All right. And I will start re-expanding my herd here as soon as, as soon as I can take animals to the lease property. I will start re-expanding my herd. I've been sitting around collecting money for 2 months. I have a lot of positive equity. If I just take the money from my business and reinvest the money without any debt, I would anticipate that I end up with about 120 animals by about March of next year. 100 to 120 animals by March, by the third month of next year. And my big goal is to run about 1,000 head of cattle for the year next year. All right, I'm really going for 1,000. And and at that point, when I take a look at it, granted that I even get somewhere close to that. If I even get somewhere close to that, it'll maybe take me 7 months to make $1 million. Maybe it'll take me, this is also what I mean by it just is what it is. And that would be, it may maybe take me 7 months to make $1 million. Maybe 8 months to make $1 million. All right. And I'm really going for it. I'm gonna go for it. I got myself this whole lease property situation squared away. I made a good deal, and I offered it to the landowners, and I got myself 110 acres of lease property, and the equity in the cattle will be the money that I get to keep. So if my herd is expanding, then you know that my money is growing. All right, as long as my herd is expanding, I am making money because the cattle are my money in the deal. All right, the cattle are where I get to have my money in the deal. That's where my store of wealth is. All right, I don't want income, right? The whole thing about income is that that's the whole thing about working for money, right? The idea of if you're gonna work for money, it's a poorness death trap, right? That's a clear sign that you're poor. All right, you're effectively never gonna make it out. If you don't have some kind of an asset strategy, if you don't have some kind of an investment portfolio, if you don't understand, if you do not even just understand the basic idea of being able to make a positive return on capital, you're gonna die poor. I guarantee it. All right, there is no reason to be poor. You don't want to end up poor. All right, trust me, or don't. All right, and then die poor and have fun with that. All right, if you want to be poor, and I've always said the whole thing about being poor is that once you've become poor, you're effectively living in a microcosm of poorness, and you're effectively gonna be poor forever. I can almost guarantee it. And when I say these things, I'm not being a malicious person. All right, there are plenty of people that even make $1 million a year and they're poor, right? There are plenty of people that make $50 million and they're still poor. They lose everything. There are people that make $10 million, they lose everything. There are people that make $500 million and they lose everything. There are people that make $10 billion and they lose everything. The amount of money involved is not going to determine whether you're poor or not. Right? At the end of the day, it's the individual. Right? And this is also what I say when you invest into a business. A lot of times, the whole idea of when you invest into a business, you're not really investing into a business. You're investing into the person who is running the business. You should take a look at what they say. Like if you want to invest in Berkshire Hathaway, you should watch what Warren Buffett has to say. If you want to invest in Tesla, you should take a look at what Elon Musk has to say. Right? We just, I was watching the news, some of the news feed, and it was like Tesla is really focusing on the automation of driving, and they signed some $16.5 billion deal with Samsung over the next 10 years for AI chips and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's that. And in all honesty, Tesla, the whole thing about Tesla and their self-driving, their self-driving, it's not perfect, but I would say that it is very neat. The car does actually drive itself. If you've ever been in a Tesla, the cars are really nice. They are really nice. I just the whole thing about my situation is that, like, if there was a dually Cybertruck, right? If there was a Cybertruck with 4 wheels in the back, and I could tow a gooseneck with it, then I would be willing to buy that. But until then, I effectively only look at diesel. I'm effectively only looking at diesel trucks, because I need that dually, and I need to be able to pull a gooseneck. All right, if I can pull a gooseneck with that can hold 30,000 pounds on it, that opens up my opportunities a lot. I can move around a lot more cattle. I can move around 5, 6, 7 times more cattle, right? And that makes me a lot more money. And so, Tesla, but look at the person who's running the company, all right? And then take a look at their product, see what direction they're going. And then, and if I was going to invest in something, and I don't know if this is going to be a phenomenal investment in terms of like, will it, outperform the market average? But I'm just gonna, I would buy corn. I think corn right now is very cheap, and you can actually buy a corn fund that is 2 times leveraged. And there may very well be a 10 to 15% upwards movement in corn over the next 15 years. And if you but is that really going to outperform the market? Well, and the whole thing about the overall broader market right now is that the interest rates on the long end of the curve. The interest rates on the long end of the curve are going down. They look like they're going down, and if the bond market, and I would say that right now is a very good time to keep an eye on the long end of the bond curve. All right, right now is a very good time to keep a good eye on the long end of the bond curve. The interest rates look like they're going down on the long end. And if the interest rates go further down pretty substantially, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the broader equity market. And the whole thing about the central bank, and my whole thing about the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and the central bank is reactionary. Okay, you have to understand that the central bank is reactionary. They don't usually they look at the data and then they act accordingly. All right, they don't try and predict things. The central bank is very reactionary, and so I don't think that the central bank will start to lower the rate until the asset market, or until the overall economy has effectively slowed to a crawl already. If the economy is already doing poorly, at that point they will lower the rate. But the big issue is, right, and I've spoken about the big issue about this. The big issue is that if there is some kind of a major credit crisis, if there is some sort of a major liquidity event, if something happens that causes a major credit crisis or a major liquidity problem, if something like that happens, the big issue is that the central bank, even taking the rate to 0 and having the government print trillions of dollars, even that may not be enough. That may not be enough to backstop the economy. That may not be enough to provide enough liquidity to the economy to stop the problem. All right, and so the big issue is, if there is some sort of a major problem, and the interest rate may even go negative, and if there are tens of trillions of dollars printed, and if there's like $10 trillion printed and the interest rate is 0 or negative, that's when a majority of people are going to get absolutely devastated. For a little bit, for a year or two, you may feel like, oh my God, everything's a magical journey because the government's giving out stimmy checks. And for 2 years, you may feel like, oh my God, but after that, effectively the goalposts will have moved. You'll have gone back to your normal job, and then effectively everybody will be doomed. All right, that's the big problem, and that's that's something that could happen, because even if we moved the goalpost, right, and I've described this whole idea. Imagine moving the goalpost. That's how I've described this idea. About 10 years ago, if you made $3,000, you were effectively lower middle class. That's what it was about 10 years ago, about 15 years ago. If you made $3,000 a month, you were effectively lower middle class. But nowadays, you have to make $5,000, right? And a lot of it has to do with the inflation that happened over the last 5 years. All right, so now it's $5,000. Imagine if we moved the goalpost one more time and it's now 7,000, right? That would effectively cripple like 90% of the economy. All right, that's the big issue. That's the big issue with the whole inflation thing. Imagine it like moving the goalpost. All right, and and well, I mean, and I've been saying this for the last couple of days. If you're poor, you should probably just get used to it because chances are, it doesn't matter. It does matter. All right, and I always encourage you to become successful. I always encourage people to become successful. I don't say these things to be malicious. If anything, I say these things to show you how I do things, right? Because at the end of the day, I make an astronomical sum of money. I don't exactly know how much money I make, but it's a lot. I would say that my net worth right now is probably about $5 million, and $5 to $7 million, and by next year my net worth will probably be over 15 million. My net worth will probably more than triple in the next 365 days. It may even more than 20. I may even go over 20 million. I don't know how much money I make. I don't. I know I make a lot. All right, I make a lot, like effectively more than anybody else on the entire planet. And the thing about my situation is that even if I had nothing, I could redo everything in 30 seconds. It doesn't matter. All right, and this is also what I mean by the amount of money. It doesn't matter. If you have $10 billion, you could still be poor. If you have $500 million, you could still be poor. If you have $50, you could still be poor. If you have $500, you could still be poor. Right? You can. The amount of money is negligible. Money at the end of the day is kind of like an illusion. It doesn't even matter. Money is kind of like this smoke and mirrors magic trick. Nothing really even costs anything. Anything that costs any significant amount of money is almost guaranteed to be an asset. And if it's an asset and it's a good asset and you purchase the asset at its appraisal value and and the asset makes you a positive return, it doesn't cost anything. Right? It doesn't cost anything. My land does not cost me anything. My cattle don't cost me anything. My equipment does not cost me anything. My food, my cattle feed does not cost me anything. The fertilizer does not cost me anything. If I stopped doing this, I would hemorrhage hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I would hemorrhage money. I would lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. All right, my business is growing. I would hemorrhage money if I stopped doing this. Nothing costs anything. All right, everything effectively costs nothing. All right, and this is the whole idea of learning how to utilize capital to make more capital. And at the end, it just is what it is. If you're poor, you're gonna die poor. I can almost guarantee it. Nobody cares. All right. If you have a bunch of opinions and you have nothing to show for it, I guarantee it. You're practically homeless. I would bet you anything you're practically homeless. All right, you don't want to be in a situation where you don't want to be in a situation where you're poor. Okay, you don't. If you're broke, that's fine. If you're broke, that's fine. That's not a big deal, right? It's kind of admirable too, right? I mean, it's like you were surrounded by temptation, but you never sold your soul to the devil, and you stayed broke. You're not rich and you're not poor, right? You're broke, and that's fine. Being broke, it ain't a big problem. If you're broke, right? I mean, you still have a possibility of making it, but the chance of you going from poor to rich, from poor to doing well for yourself is almost 0%. And even if you found a way to do it very quickly, it would be like winning the lottery. The money could ruin your life. The money could ruin your life. The whole thing about, money is not, money is more of an accountability system than anything. All right, money is borderline negligible. It doesn't matter. Money's an accountability system. All right, money's an accountability system. If you're an idiot and you have money, you're going to be held accountable for being an idiot. All right, chances are it will happen. All right, and at the end of the day, money talks. Right, it's not an opinion. Money's not an opinion, and money talks. I mean, money just is what it is. All right. It just is what it is. Money's an accountability system. All right, if you do very well for yourself, if you if you do very well for yourself, and you get up and you get after it, and you figure out things, even even when it's hard, you continue to do things, and et cetera, then you'll be held accountable for that too, and you will be rewarded with more money. All right, I mean, it's just, money's an accountability system. If you're an idiot and you have money, you will be held accountable for being an idiot. It's only fair, right? It is what it is. I mean, money is not some debatable thing. It's not an opinion. All right, when it comes to money, I do very well for myself, and just to put things in perspective, because I don't think about money. I don't have to. All right, I think about other things like the health of my cattle. What kind of a deal should I offer for leased properties, right? What kind of equipment should I be looking into buying? Where do I see my business going? That's the kind of stuff that I worry about. I don't even really think about money. But for me to make $1 million, if I was legitimately going to focus myself on making $1 million, if that was the goal, which is not, why would I focus myself on doing something trivial like that? The money's not going to do anything. And at the end of the day, even if I did it, I would just be taxed half of it. So why would I do that? I think about other things like, coming up with a deal for lease properties, right? How many cattle do I think I can run on my property? What kind of grass am I going to be growing? What kind of fertilizer can I put on this grass? Should I be herbiciding my property? All right, that's the kind of stuff that I think about. I don't think about money. Money to me is already trivial. Everything effectively already costs me nothing. But if I were to sit here and think about money, and the idea, and just flat out think about how much money, if I were going to use $1 million as an example, if I were to make $1 million cash starting today, if I was going to make $1 million cash, maybe it would take me a year. But if I started at the end of the year, maybe it would take me 7 months. My earnings are compounding. The amount, it's in another way to think about this is, I effectively give myself a raise every month. I give myself a raise. I end up giving myself a raise every month. All right, my earnings are compounding. The size of my herd is growing. The amount of money that I bring home is going up. If I were to legitimately just think about making $1 million, if that was the big idea, like, I'm not even going to think about the cattle anymore. I'm not going to think about the lease properties anymore. I'm not going to think about making deals for lease properties anymore. I'm not going to think about growing the grass. I'm not going to think about any of this stuff. I'm just going to be a poor person and think about money. I'm just going to be a poor person and think about cash. Excuse me. This is something that only really poor people do. Think about cash as money. It's a very poor thing to do. And if I were, and I don't want to make it a habit, and I don't want to make it a habit. I'm not going to make it a habit. I will just state this one time. If I were to focus myself on making $1 million liquid, and I started today, maybe it would take me a year. Maybe. My earnings are compounding upwards, though. I will start re-expanding my herd, etc., etc. If I were to start by the end of this year, it may only take me 7 months. It may only take me 8 months. But, you see how trivial it is, right? I mean, and realistically, I'll be, realistically by about March of next year, and, by about March of next year, I may even start bringing home over $150,000 a month. I may even start doing over 150 grand a month. I'll have to see. I'll let you know when I get there. But that's effectively what I'm headed for. My income is my the amount of money that I just make on a monthly basis is going to effectively go over 100 grand pretty quick. It's going to go over $100,000 a month pretty fast. All right, I really want to get myself into about 1,000 cattle for the year next year. I really want to do about 1,000 head of cattle next year. And when it comes to farming, it just is what it is. If you think that you can do better than me, then let's see it. At the end of the day, the money that I make is the same money that anybody else makes. And, I effectively make more money than anybody on the entire planet. Effectively anybody. It doesn't matter. All right. I could be put on a field and it's just a piece of brush. And I could legitimately turn that field into a full-on cattle operation within 48 hours. All right. It doesn't matter. All right. If I had nothing, I could redo everything. If I had $5,000, I could turn $5,000 into $100,000 with a 100% guarantee by starting myself a cattle business, and it wouldn't even take me 2 years. I don't know how much money I make. I make an astronomical sum of money. I don't worry about money. That's how much money I make. Everything costs me nothing. That's how much money I make. Everything costs me nothing. It doesn't matter, all right? You know, everything costs me nothing. I will more than double the size of my herd by the, by March of next year. I may even more than triple the size of my herd. And it's not going to cost me anything. It'll make me more money. All right?